The realtor's smile had been too wide, too fixed, the kind of smile you give when you're desperate to close a deal. At the time, I didn't care. The house was mine. I'd saved for years, scraping together every paycheck, skipping vacations, saying no to nights out just to build enough for a down payment. When I finally signed the paperwork, I thought it was the happiest day of my life. A home in a quiet Ohio town, tucked away on a sleepy street lined with maples and old mailboxes leaning from decades of storms. The neighbors were polite, if not a little distant. The air smelled faintly of cornfields and asphalt, a mix of rural charm and Midwestern gloom. But when I unlocked the front door for the first time, I realized something was wrong. There was no furniture, no dust, no smell of rot or mold. The air inside felt, still, like the house had been holding its breath. But what really caught my eye wasn't the silence. It was the paper. A single sheet was taped to the wall of the entryway. The paper was yellowed, curling at the edges, but the words typed onto it were sharp and precise. At the top, in bold, "House rules." There were 10 of them, written in plain black ink. Always lock the front door before sunset. Never leave the windows open after dark. If you hear footsteps upstairs when you're alone, do not investigate. Do not use the basement after 11 p.m. If the phone rings after midnight, do not answer it. Avoid looking directly at the mirrors between 3 to 3:33 a.m. Do not feed the stray cat that lingers outside the porch. If you see the lights flicker 3 times in a row, hide immediately. Do not attempt to leave the house after midnight. The house chooses who stays. Never try to resist. I read them twice, then laughed nervously. Probably a prank, I thought. The previous owner must have been eccentric, maybe even unwell. Everyone in town had told me the house had been sitting empty for years, so maybe whoever lived here before had just lost their mind. Still, something about the rules burrowed into me. The phrasing wasn't playful. It wasn't a joke. It read more like commandments. I pulled the paper down, folded it up, and shoved it in my jacket pocket. By the time I finished hauling the last of my boxes from the car, the sun had dipped low, burning red over the horizon. I locked the front door out of habit. My brain whispered, Rule 1. That first night, I tried to sleep in the upstairs bedroom, the one that looked out over the street. The house creaked and shifted like any old building, but it wasn't the ordinary groans of wood and pipes. It was rhythmic. Pacing. Footsteps. My heart jumped. I froze in bed, straining my ears. The sound came from the hallway, slow and deliberate, as if someone was walking from one end to the other. Rule 3. If you hear footsteps upstairs when you're alone, do not investigate. I clenched the sheet in my fists. I was alone. I knew I was. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled the hallway, pausing near my bedroom door. Then silence. I forced myself to breathe, to count backward from 10. It's nothing. Houses make sounds. Wind, maybe a raccoon outside. I repeated those excuses like mantras until exhaustion finally dragged me into uneasy sleep. Morning came with pale, gray light bleeding through the curtains. The house looked ordinary again, walls painted beige, carpet worn but clean. The events of the night before felt distant, like a bad dream. I unpacked, trying to distract myself. Around noon, I stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, the neighborhood quiet except for the distant bark of a dog. That's when I saw it. A cat sat at the edge of the walkway. It was jet black, its fur mangled in places like it had been in fights. Its yellow eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. The cat didn't move closer, didn't run. It just watched. I thought of Rule 7. Do not feed the stray cat that lingers outside the porch. Shoo, I muttered, waving a hand. The cat didn't budge. I turned back into the house, pretending it didn't bother me. But all through the day, when I glanced out the window, it was still there. Watching. That evening, I cooked myself a simple dinner, trying to feel normal. I had Netflix running on my laptop, some dumb comedy playing in the background. By the time I looked at the clock, the sky was already dark. That's when I realized I hadn't closed the living room window. Rule 2, never leave the windows open after dark. The window was only cracked, barely an inch, but the instant I noticed it, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. 3 times. My body reacted before my brain did. My heart slammed against my ribs as I dove to the floor, crawling beneath the dining table. Rule 8, if you see the lights flicker 3 times in a row, hide immediately. The house went dead silent. From outside the open window came a sound. Breathing. Slow, heavy, and close, far too close for comfort. Something scraped against the siding, nails or claws dragging across the wood. The breathing grew louder, wheezing, almost wet. I clamped a hand over my mouth, forcing myself to stay still. After what felt like hours, the noise stopped. The light steadied. When I finally dared to move, I rushed to slam the window shut and lock it tight. For the rest of the night, I sat awake on the couch, lights blazing, rules replaying in my mind like scripture. I didn't believe in haunted houses. I didn't believe in curses, monsters, or any of that crap. But as the hours crawled by, one truth settled in my bones, heavy and undeniable. Whoever wrote those rules hadn't been joking. And now I was trapped in this house with them. The next morning I told myself I'd imagine it all, the footsteps, the breathing, the flickering lights. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even nerves about living alone for the first time. People hallucinate under pressure, maybe that's all it was. But when I stepped outside to grab the mail, the cat was still there. It sat on the walkway like a sentinel, tail curled neatly around its paws, staring at the front door as if it had been waiting all night. Its yellow eyes narrowed when it saw me. Persistent little bastard, I muttered, trying to walk past. The fur along its spine bristled, but it didn't move. I shoved the mail into my pocket and forced myself not to look back. Inside, the house felt heavier, like the air was thicker than before. Every room carried a faint smell, something metallic, like pennies left too long in a glass of water. I tried to shake it off and went back to unpacking. Around noon, the phone rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The landline on the kitchen wall buzzed with an old-fashioned ring, loud and shrill. I frowned. I hadn't even thought to set up service yet. The ringing continued, insistent. My hand hovered over the receiver before the words from the list screamed in my head. Rule 5, if the phone rings after midnight, do not answer it. It was barely past noon. Not after midnight, I told myself. It should be fine. But something about it felt wrong. I grabbed the receiver anyway. Hello? Static hissed on the other end, like 1,000 whispers crawling over each other. Beneath it, faint and deliberate, came a voice. You shouldn't have answered. I froze. The line went dead. Slowly, I replaced the receiver, my hand trembling. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second stretching too long. That's when I noticed the cat again. Through the kitchen window, it sat on the porch railing, staring in. This time its mouth was slightly open, tongue lolling in a way that looked almost human. That night, I tried to follow the rules to the letter. Front door locked before sunset. Check. Windows shut tight. Check. Basement door bolted. Check. Still, the footsteps returned. This time, they didn't just circle the hallway. They stopped outside my bedroom door. The wood groaned as though weight pressed against it from the other side. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. A soft knock rattled the door. 1, 2, 3. I bit down on my fist to keep from screaming. Then, from the other side, a voice whispered. Let me in. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't loud. It was calm, almost pleading. I squeezed my eyes shut, rocking back and forth. Don't investigate. Don't respond. The knock came again, harder this time. The voice grew louder. Let me in. I stuffed the pillow over my ears. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. At some point the knocking stopped. The house fell silent. When I woke in the morning, the door was ajar. On the third day, I met one of the neighbors. An older man with a hunchback and thick glasses was raking leaves in his yard while I walked out to grab groceries. He raised a hand stiffly. "New in town?" he asked. "Yeah. Just moved in," I said, gesturing to the house. His expression flickered, a flash of something like pity. "That place," he muttered. "Didn't think anyone would buy it." "Why? Is there a problem with it?" He shook his head quickly. "No problem. Just history." "What kind of history?" I pressed. He avoided my gaze. "You'll find out." Then he turned and shuffled back inside without another word. I stood there for a long time, groceries dangling from my hand, staring at the cat still perched on my porch like a statue. That night, I made a mistake. It wasn't intentional. I'd been sorting boxes in the basement, losing track of time, when I glanced at my phone and realized it was 11:12 p.m. Rule 4, do not use the basement after 11 p.m. My chest tightened. I bolted up the stairs 2 at a time, fumbling for the basement light switch. But before I could flip it, the bulb above me burst with a sharp pop, plunging me into darkness. Something moved behind me. The sound was subtle, like fabric dragging across the concrete floor. Then a low, with sound, breathing, but harsher than anything human. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I slammed the basement door shut and threw the bolt. From the other side came a single thud, so powerful it rattled the hinges. Then silence. I didn't sleep that night. By the fourth morning, the house no longer felt like mine. The walls seemed closer, the shadows darker. The mirrors bothered me most. Every time I passed one, I caught the briefest flicker of movement, something standing just behind me, gone when I turned my head. I started keeping the lights on during the day, curtains drawn tight. Still, the rules clawed at me. Never answer the phone after midnight. Don't use the basement after 11. Don't look in the mirrors between 3 o'clock and 3:33 a.m. Who had written them? And why those exact times? That evening, as the sky dimmed, I stood in the hallway staring at the list again. My pulse thudded in my ears. If the rules were real, then someone had lived here long enough to write them down. Someone had survived this long. But where were they now? That night, I woke at 3:15 a.m. Not because of footsteps, or knocking, or even the sound of the phone ringing. I woke because the mirror across the room was glowing. A faint silver light pulsed from within its glass, illuminating the walls. Shapes writhed across the surface like shadows underwater. Against every screaming instinct, I turned my head to look. The reflection wasn't of my room. It was of a hallway, narrow, endless, lined with doors. A figure stood at the far end, pale and thin, its head bent at an impossible angle. It lifted its hand and waved at me. I yanked the blanket over my head and didn't move until dawn. By the fifth night, I wasn't unpacking anymore. I wasn't cleaning, decorating, or even thinking about making this house mine. I was surviving. The rules weren't just guidelines, they were the only reason I was still breathing. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper reminded me that something in this house wanted me gone. Or worse, wanted me to stay forever. But the worst part? I was starting to believe Rule 10. The house chooses who stays. Never try to resist. The cat was always there. Day and night, rain or shine, it sat on the porch rail or the walkway, sometimes curled up on the steps like it was guarding the house. Sometimes, when I glanced too quickly, I swore it wasn't a cat at all. Its body was wrong, too long in the torso, too angular in the limbs. But when I blinked, it was just a cat again. I never fed it. But I knew it was waiting. On the sixth day, I forced myself out of the house. I couldn't stand the silence anymore, the oppressive air that seemed to weigh on my lungs. I drove into town, hoping to distract myself. There was a diner on the corner, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and bacon grease no matter the hour. I slid into a booth, grateful for the sound of clinking dishes and murmuring voices. When the waitress, a woman with kind eyes and deep lines around her mouth, asked where I lived, I made the mistake of telling her. Her face paled. She glanced toward the door as though checking who might overhear. Then she leaned close. "You need to leave." I froze. "What do you mean?" "That house," she whispered, "it doesn't let people go. You're already marked." I tried to laugh it off, but the sound caught in my throat. "Is this some local ghost story?" Her eyes were dead serious. "It isn't a story. Ask around. People move in, and after a while, they disappear. Sometimes the for sale sign goes back up, sometimes it doesn't. But they never leave town alive." I stared at her. My hands trembled against the mug. She straightened suddenly, her voice normal again. "More coffee?" I nodded dumbly, but the rest of the meal sat untouched. When I drove back, the house loomed at the end of the street like it had been waiting for me. And of course, the cat was there. That night, the phone rang again. I bolted upright in bed, staring at the red glow of the clock. 12:04 a.m. Every instinct screamed at me not to answer. My hands shook as the shrill ringing drilled into my skull. Ring. 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 It didn't stop. It didn't fade. It only grew louder, vibrating through the walls, the floor, the air itself until I felt like I was suffocating. Finally, I snapped. I grabbed the receiver. "Hello?" Silence. Then a faint sound, like a recording played backward. Words tangled together, too fast, too warped. My ears strained, trying to pick out syllables, until suddenly it shifted. The voice became clear. "You broke the rules." The line went dead. The lights flickered once. Twice. 3 times. I dropped the phone and dove under the bed. The house shook, groaning like a living thing. From the hallway came a slow dragging sound, heavy and deliberate. A shape passed beneath the crack of my door, blotting out the light. I clamped a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to scream. Something stopped right outside my room. The doorknob rattled. Then a whisper, low and wet, seeped through the wood. "Let me in." I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking at dawn, stiff and cold, still curled beneath the bed. The phone was back on the hook. The lights were steady. But the door was wide open. On the 7th day, I cracked. I needed answers. I dug through the boxes the realtor had left, old documents, warranties, scraps of paper. Buried at the bottom, I found a thin folder. Inside was a single newspaper clipping from decades ago. "Local family missing, house stands empty." The photo showed the same house, my house, only older. The article claimed the family vanished without a trace one night. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle. Just gone. The last line made my skin crawl. Neighbors claimed the family had complained of strange noises in the days leading up to their disappearance. I shoved the clipping away, my hands shaking. That evening, I didn't bother with dinner. I sat at the kitchen table with the list of rules in front of me, staring at Rule 10. The house chooses who stays. Never try to resist. I whispered to the empty air, "What happens if I do resist?" The lights flickered. Once. Twice. I scrambled beneath the table before the third came, heart pounding like a drum. At exactly 3 a.m., I woke again. The mirror across the room glowed faintly, just as before. But this time, I didn't hide. I forced myself to look. The hallway and the reflection stretched longer than before, the doors now open. Something moved between them, crawling on all fours, its joints bending backward. Its pale face turned toward me, its mouth stretching impossibly wide. I stumbled from bed, yanking the blanket over the mirror. My pulse hammered in my throat. But when I turned, the blanket was gone. The mirror was bare. And my reflection wasn't alone. Something stood behind me. I didn't leave the house the next day. I couldn't. Something about the way the mirror had shifted, how the reflection no longer belonged to me, left me hollow, too shaken to step outside. The cat was still there. Always there. I avoided looking at it. I avoided looking at anything too long, in case it moved when I wasn't paying attention. I tried to convince myself I still had control, that I wasn't just some rat in a maze the house had built. But that lie dissolved quickly. Because that night, I broke a rule. On purpose. It started with the footsteps. As soon as the sun went down, they returned. Pacing the hallway. Circling my room. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always there. And then, just like before, the knock. 3 sharp raps against the bedroom door. "Let me in," the voice whispered. Every night it was the same. Every night I obeyed. I hid. I stayed silent. But something inside me snapped. Fear curdled into anger, into defiance. I couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows, swallowing rules like commandments. I stood. I unlocked the door. And I opened it. The hallway was empty. Just pale carpet stretching into darkness, the air still and heavy. I stepped out, my breath fogging though the house wasn't cold. "I'm not afraid of you," I lied into the silence. That's when the basement door creaked open. I froze. The smell hit me first, wet earth and rot, like meat left too long in the sun. A whisper rose from the dark stairwell, low and guttural. Finally. The lights flickered, and for the first time, they didn't come back on. I stumbled backward into the hallway, plunging into blackness. My hands clawed at the walls, searching for a switch, but the house groaned around me like a living thing. Something moved at the far end of the hall. A shape. Too tall, too thin, its limbs dragging against the walls as it crawled closer. I bolted into the bedroom and slammed the door. The knob twisted immediately, violently. The wood splintered under pressure. I grabbed the dresser and shoved it against the door, my chest heaving. Then I heard it. The phone. It rang, shrill and unrelenting, echoing up the stairwell from the kitchen. Rule 5, if the phone rings after midnight, do not answer it. But it was 11:58. My eyes darted to the clock. The ringing grew louder, more frantic. Each shriek of the bell drilled into my skull. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching as I moved. My feet pounded against the carpet, breath ragged, the ringing pulling me like a leash. By the time I reached the kitchen, the phone had fallen silent. But someone was standing there. At first I thought it was my reflection in the dark window above the sink, but then it blinked. A pale figure with my face. My eyes. My mouth. But the grin stretched too wide, too sharp. I staggered back. What the hell? It lifted a finger and pressed it to its lips. "Shoo," it whispered. Then the phone rang again, deafening. I don't remember dropping it, but suddenly the receiver was in my hand. The voice on the other end was calm this time. Familiar. "You don't belong here." I swallowed hard. "Then let me leave." A pause. Then, "You can't. Not after breaking the rules." The line went dead. The mirror in the hallway shattered. Not cracked, shattered, bursting outward as if something had pushed through from the other side. And then I wasn't alone. They crawled from the walls, from the corners, from the dark places I'd been avoiding. Shapes too human to be beasts, too wrong to be human. Their limbs bent at unnatural angles, their faces pale and blurred like smudged glass. Dozens of them. And all of them whispering the same words. "Stay. Stay. Stay." I bolted for the front door. My fingers scrambled at the locks, twisting, pulling. But the knob wouldn't turn. The rules screamed in my mind, Rule 9, do not attempt to leave the house after midnight. The clock on the wall read 12:01 a.m. My heart plummeted. Behind me, the whispers grew louder. The shapes drew closer, their mouths opening in perfect unison. I ran upstairs, desperate, crashing into the bedroom and slamming the door behind me. The footsteps followed immediately, circling, pacing, never letting me breathe. I curled in the corner, shaking, whispering apologies to a house that didn't care. When the mirror across the room began to glow again, I didn't even move. This time, I saw clearly. The hallway. Endless. The doors wide open. And inside those doorways stood all the pale figures, waiting. One of them stepped forward, its smile too wide. It was me. By dawn, the figures were gone. The mirrors were dark. The house was silent. But something had changed. The rules no longer felt like warnings. They felt like promises. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd already lost. I didn't remember falling asleep, but when I woke, sunlight was streaming through the curtains. For a moment, I almost believed everything had been a nightmare. The house looked normal again. No broken mirrors. No flickering lights. No whispers seeping through the walls. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Because I hadn't followed the rules. And now the house was waiting. I tried leaving that morning. I packed what I could into my car, just the essentials. Clothes, wallet, phone charger. I didn't care about the rest. When I turned the key in the ignition, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. I tried again. And again. Nothing. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, panic rising in my throat. The street outside was eerily empty, no neighbors walking dogs, no cars passing. Just silence, broken only by the steady sound of wind in the trees. And when I looked back at the house, the cat was still there. Sitting on the porch. Watching. Its mouth opened, and I swear I heard a whisper carried on the breeze. Stay. I went back inside. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt I had no choice. My legs moved heavy, mechanical, as if the house itself was pulling me back. Inside, the paper with the rules was waiting on the kitchen table. I hadn't put it there. One line had changed. Rule 10, the house chooses who stays. Never try to resist. Beneath it, a new sentence had appeared in smaller print. You belong to the house now. The days blurred after that. Daylight felt shorter, nights longer. I stopped opening the curtains. The phone rang sometimes, always at the edge of midnight, but I never touched it again. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the mirror, only it wasn't doing what I was doing. It smiled when I didn't. It waved when I froze. Other times I woke to the sound of the basement door creaking open. I'd find muddy footprints on the stairs, leading upward, and they never matched mine. I thought about the family from the newspaper clipping. Maybe they hadn't vanished. Maybe they were still here. Maybe that's what the shadows were, the house keeping them, reshaping them, making them part of itself. Maybe that's what it was doing to me. On the 10th night, I broke again. The footsteps were louder than ever, pounding up and down the hallway outside my room. The mirror glowed like a second window, the endless corridor stretching inside it. Figures paced there, pale and patient, their mouths moving in silent unison. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood at the mirror, staring into that other world. My reflection didn't move with me, it only tilted its head, smiling that too wide smile. I whispered, "What do you want from me?" The glass rippled. And my reflection stepped forward. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running. All I remember is waking up on the floor of the entryway, my head pounding, the paper with the rules crumpled in my fist. Only now, there were 11. House rules. Always lock the front door before sunset. Never leave the windows open after dark. If you hear footsteps upstairs when you're alone, do not investigate. Do not use the basement after 11 p.m. If the phone rings after midnight, do not answer it. Avoid looking directly at the mirrors between 3 to 3:33 a.m. Do not feed the stray cat that lingers outside the porch. If you see the lights flicker 3 times in a row, hide immediately. Do not attempt to leave the house after midnight. The house chooses who stays. Never try to resist. Write down the rules for the next one. Leave them where they can be found. My stomach dropped. My hands shook. The house had chosen me. I'm writing this now because I don't think I'll last much longer. I can feel it, the way the walls breathe when I walk past, the way the whispers crawl under my skin when I try to sleep. The rules aren't warnings anymore. They're scripture. They're the only thing keeping me together. And when the next unlucky soul unlocks the front door, they'll find this note taped neatly to the wall, waiting for them. The rules will keep them alive, at least for a while. But no one leaves this house in Ohio. No one.